It's 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and you are standing in your own kitchen with absolutely nowhere to be. That used to be the dream. Now it's just Tuesday. You retired at 32, 5 years ago. $5.1 million net worth the day you walked out. Built from a startup equity stake that vested at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right market. And you had the discipline nobody expected you to have. You didn't touch a dollar of it for 14 months while the lawyers finished the paperwork. You remember signing the final documents in a glass conference room on a Thursday, shaking three hands and walking to your car in a parking garage that smelled like exhaust and freedom. You sat in the driver's seat for 11 minutes before you turned the key. You didn't cry, you didn't call anyone. You just sat there, thinking, this is it. This is the part where my life starts. Here's what nobody tells you about that moment. It's not the finish line. It's the starting gun for a race you didn't know you'd entered. The first 6 months were exactly what you pictured. You slept until your body woke you up naturally, which took about 3 weeks to actually happen because your nervous system didn't believe you yet. You traveled. Portugal for 5 weeks. A rented stone house outside Lagos with shutters that stuck in the heat. You learned to make bread badly and then less badly. You read 4 books a month, then 8, then you stopped counting because counting felt like the old life creeping back in. Your family thought you'd sold the company for a good amount. Your mother still asks if you're going to get a real job again eventually. And you just say, we'll see, because the actual number would change the way she looks at you, and you're not ready for that yet. Maybe you never will be. By month 9, something started to shift, and it took you a long time to name it. You'd wake up and there was no calendar invite, no Slack notification, no one waiting on a deliverable. And instead of relief, there was a low static hum underneath your ribs that you couldn't place. You told yourself it was adjustment. You told yourself everyone feels this after a big transition. You went for a run. You didn't feel better. You went for another run the next day and the day after that. And somewhere around month 11, you realized you were running 4 miles every morning, not because you loved it, but because it was the only appointment left on your calendar. And a life needs at least one appointment or it starts to come apart at the seams. Your old coworker Priya still texts you sometimes, usually late, usually after a rough day. Must be nice, she wrote once, half joking, after describing a 9-hour day of back-to-back meetings. You didn't respond for 2 hours because you didn't know how to say that you'd spent that same 9 hours reorganizing a garage that didn't need reorganizing, and that somewhere around hour 6 you'd had a small, quiet panic in the driveway that you never told anyone about. You wrote back, "Ha, yeah." That was the whole reply. Some things don't translate. The money itself behaves exactly the way you modeled it. $5.1 million moved into a 3-fund portfolio the week the deal closed. Total market, international, a bond allocation that scales up 0.5% every year on autopilot. A 3.6% withdrawal rate, conservative by design, padded for sequence risk because you read the research obsessively before you pulled the trigger. Because a 32-year-old retiree has 50, 60 years of runway to protect against, not 30. $183,000 a year, give or take what the market decides. You've never come close to spending it. Some years you spend $61,000. The gap between what you're allowed to spend and what you actually spend keeps growing, and that gap used to feel like proof you'd won. Now it just sits there, a number that means less every year, because the thing you actually needed was never priced in dollars. You still drive the same 2016 Outback you bought used the year before you sold the company. It has 97,000 miles on it and a check engine light that's been on for 4 months because you finally looked it up and it's just an oxygen sensor, nothing urgent. And there's something almost funny about a man with 8 figures ignoring a $340 repair out of pure inertia. Your neighbor, Callum, 3 houses down, thinks you do something in consulting, remote, flexible hours. You've let him believe that for 2 years because the alternative conversation is longer and stranger than either of you have time for on a Saturday morning taking out the recycling. Here's the part that actually surprised you, the part you never read in any of the early retirement blogs you devoured before you pulled the trigger. Purpose doesn't show up on its own just because you finally have the time for it. You thought it would. You thought if you cleared enough space, something would rush in to fill it. A passion project, a calling, some dormant version of yourself that had been buried under deadlines for a decade. Instead, the space just stayed empty for a long time, echoing, and you had to sit inside that echo far longer than you expected before anything useful started to grow there. Month 14, you tried consulting again. 2 days a week, low stakes, just to have something on the calendar. You lasted 4 months. Not because the work was hard, it wasn't. It was almost insultingly easy compared to what you used to carry. But because you kept catching yourself doing it for the wrong reason. Not for the money, for the Tuesday, for having somewhere to be at 10:47 a.m. instead of standing in your kitchen listening to the refrigerator hum. You quit again, quietly, no announcement, the same way you'd quit the first job. You started volunteering at a community workshop that teaches teenagers basic carpentry 2 afternoons a week because a friend of a friend mentioned they needed someone who could handle a table saw without supervision. You told yourself it was just something to do. 6 months in, a 15-year-old named Devin built a bookshelf that actually held books without sagging. And the look on his face when it held its first weight, that's something to your chest that 4 years of six-figure withdrawal statements never managed to do. You didn't tell anyone at the workshop what your net worth was. You still don't. To them, you're just the guy who shows up on Tuesdays and Thursdays and knows how to true a warped board. The isolation is the part nobody warned you about because it doesn't look like isolation from the outside. You have people around you constantly, your wife, your parents, old friends, new friends from the workshop. But there's a particular loneliness in being 37 years old, financially unrecognizable from everyone in your peer group, and unable to say so out loud without changing every relationship in the room. Your college roommate Theo is still grinding at a firm downtown, still complaining about his commute, still 4 years from paying off his mortgage, and you love him, genuinely. But there's a wall between you now that neither of you built on purpose. He thinks you understand his stress because you both used to have the same job. You don't say that you haven't worried about money, in the way he means it, in over 5 years. Saying it wouldn't help him, it would just make the wall visible. Your wife Marisol gets it because she was there for the whole climb, the 80-hour weeks, the ramen years, the night you both sat on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment and calculated whether the equity was even real or just numbers on a screen that could evaporate in a down round. She's the only person you can say the quiet part to. Some nights you tell her you don't know what you're for anymore, and she doesn't try to fix it. She just says, "You're figuring it out." That's allowed to take a while. And somehow that's the only thing that's ever actually helped. Here's the trap, the one nobody puts in the thumbnail. It isn't that the money runs out. It doesn't. The math is sound. The math was always going to be sound. You stress tested it against a decade of down markets before you ever quit. The trap is subtler than that. It's that a system built entirely around earning and achieving doesn't know how to switch itself off just because the target's been hit. You spent 17 years, a paper route at 14, a decade of 80-hour weeks after that, training a part of your brain to need a scoreboard. And then one day you removed the scoreboard entirely, and that part of your brain didn't retire with you. It just started looking for a new game. Sometimes in places that weren't healthy. A stretch in year 3 where you day traded a small slice of the portfolio just to feel the old adrenaline again, which cost you about $14,000 and taught you nothing except that you can recreate the stress without the paycheck attached to it. You crossed $6 million in the portfolio last spring, mostly market growth, barely any spending pulling it down. Your accountant sent the year-end summary the way she always does. Flat subject line, no exclamation point. You read it standing at the kitchen counter. The same 10:47 a.m. kind of morning. And you felt almost nothing. Not disappointment, just a strange flatness. The number too large to mean anything anymore, like reading a distance in light years. What actually changed things wasn't a number at all. It was Devin from the workshop, texting you a photo of the bookshelf 18 months later. Still standing, now holding a stack of his sister's college textbooks with the message, "Still holds up, LOL." You stared at that message longer than you stared at any brokerage statement in 5 years. That was the first Tuesday in a long time that felt like it had a floor under it. You still have the $5 million, more now. You still have the Outback with the check engine light you still haven't fixed. You still tell Callum you do something in consulting. And most days now, that's fine. That's more than fine. Because you've stopped waiting for the money to hand you a reason to get up. and started building the reason yourself, board by board, Tuesday by Tuesday, the same slow way you built the money in the first place, except this time nobody's counting. But some nights later, after Marisol's asleep, you still find yourself doing the math out of habit. Withdrawal rate, portfolio balance, years of runway left, even though you stopped needing 2 years ago. And you wonder if you'd known at 32, standing in that parking garage with the engine still off, that the number was never going to be the hard part. That the hard part was going to be everything that came after the number stopped mattering. Would you have signed those papers the same way? Or would you have asked a very different question before you ever walked out that door?